Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Let's Talk Tropics. Many of you know that our potential tropical cyclone has been upgraded to Tropical Storm Helene. A reconnaissance aircraft out there finding a closed center of circulation with winds at 45 miles per hour. And there you can see there on the left the latitude and longitude. So those are the numbers that we have for right now. We'll get another update on the position as well as the intensity coming up at 1 o'clock, and then we're going to get a whole new cone coming in at around 4 o'clock later this afternoon. So you have to catch that on some of my social media pages. We're going to get to everything Helene here in just a little bit. We'll take care of a bit of business first. Skies are partly cloudy. Temperature here in Lafayette, 88 degrees. It's a hot one again. 95 is what the heat index is. We'll get a little relief from some rain coming tomorrow as a front kind of moves into the region. And I think we'll start feeling the effects of a cold front coming in as we get into Thursday afternoon and evening. And Friday right now is looking pretty good. And we are going to be helped as long as Helene stays off to our east. And there's a quick look at the radar this afternoon. Got a couple of isolated showers here and there over Texas, and also a shower that popped up over parts of Marsh Island. I did want to remind you that this is another one of those days where we might be able to see some tropical funnel clouds down along the coast. I had some pictures sent to me over the past couple of days in Iberia and St. Mary parishes, but there's a special advisory or special weather statement that came down from the Lake Charles National Weather Service just about an hour and a half ago with a tropical funnel cloud that was seen out over Marsh Island. So there may be a few more of those tropical funnel clouds coming in later this afternoon, especially there in the coastal parishes. So if you live in Cameron, Vermilion, Iberia, or St. Mary or Terrebonne parishes, you might catch some of those tropical funnel clouds off in the distance. They're really cool to see. They rarely touch the ground and usually are just something fun to watch, and they don't really cause too many problems. Outside here in Lafayette, in the immediate Acadiana area, we do have partly cloudy skies. Again, kind of a hot one out there. And as far as the skies, they look like they're a little more clear off to the north with a little more cloud cover kind of coming in from the east. And looking at the national satellite picture, there's a number of things that are going on. Of course, we've got a cold front that's right about in here, stretching across the middle part of the country. You've got an upper trough that's digging here pretty quick, and that's going to be heading southward and should push this front off toward the southeast and kind of help us out. And then, of course, you can see all this mess down here to the south. This is Tropical Storm Helene, and a lot of what we're seeing with this trough here and a ridge of high pressure here, that's why all the models are basically going right up into the Florida Panhandle and have been for a number of days. The forecast confidence, at least when with the different computer models, seems to be pretty high. But we are still watching for a little bit of wiggle room possibly. Remember when you're looking at that National Hurricane Center's cone, particularly if you like to look at the one that has the line and the dots on there. Remember, we're not forecasting for a particular address here. We are kind of looking at a larger region. And there are going to be different effects when it comes to this hurricane because it could be quite large and it's going to be spreading over a large part of Florida. We are in good shape here in Louisiana. Right now we don't have a lot to worry about except maybe some rougher seas in our southeastern parts of the Gulf of Mexico there off the Louisiana coast, but for the most part we are not. But this is Let's Talk Tropics, and we've got a big tropical system that's going to be interesting to watch here over the next couple of days, especially as it gets into the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico where it may have a better chance for seeing some rapid intensification. But today, a really pretty day out in the Gulf, especially here off the Louisiana coast. I did want to point out that there's a pretty good tropical wave that's out here over the western part of the Atlantic Ocean. And again, this thing doesn't want to work again, but there's a look at the tropical wave there. That's going to be heading toward the Windward and Leeward Islands and probably bring some pretty good thunderstorms. And then we've got another tropical wave that's out off the African coast near the Cape Verde Islands out here. And that is probably going to become Tropical Storm Isaac here in the next couple of days. So Helene is over the northwestern Gulf, and then what is that tropical wave near the Cape Verde Islands has a pretty good chance chance for development here over the next several days. So let's dive right into Tropical Storm Helene. It got the name for the 10 o'clock advisory earlier today. So winds are currently at 45 miles per hour, still somewhat disorganized. That western side is still dealing with some wind shear coming in from the southwest. There's kind of an upper low that's back over the Yucatan that should weaken and kind of move out of the way. And that's why we think we're going to see better intensification here as we go into the next 24 hours, especially as it pushes over the southern Gulf of Mexico. And I'll show you some of the reasons why I think we're going to be seeing the possibility of rapid intensification. This is something that I've been concerned about with a developing system in this particular area of the Atlantic Basin since the beginning of the hurricane season. So there's a quick look at the cone. And remember, the cone is a margin of error, and it's based on the last 5 years of hurricane forecasts. So basically, 2/3 of all tropical systems will stay within that cone. And the numbers that the width of this cone is based on the margin of error over the past 5 years. So when we're out 60 hours, where we are right now, you have about an 88-mile range back and forth. So again, we're not forecasting a specific town or a specific address. So you got an 88-mile range when we're 60 hours out, and a 102-mile range when we're 72. So where you're looking there at that major hurricane right there on the coast of Florida, it could still wiggle all the way to the west there, getting closer to Destin, or it could wiggle its way all the way to the east, which would be around Steinhatchee, which is where Hurricane Debbie made landfall. So unfortunately, this area has already been hit by a hurricane this year, and it looks like very, very close to those areas are going to be seeing hurricane conditions here coming up Thursday evening. Really, the only thing that's changed about the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center is the timing is just a little bit slower, having it come in Thursday evening, rather than a lot of the forecasts we were seeing yesterday was looking more toward Thursday afternoon. But the effects of this is going to be felt pretty widespread, and that's why there are hurricane watches and tropical storm watches all up and down the Florida west coast, because we're going to be seeing some storm surge coming in, even if the hurricane doesn't make landfall there between Key West and up to around Tampa. Because of the direction of movement, you're going to see a lot of water being thrown in those areas. So down toward Key West, probably going to see a couple of feet worth of storm surge, and then once you start to work up the southwestern Florida coast, it could be up to 5 feet, and around the Tampa area from Fort Myers up to Tampa, you could be talking about up to 8 feet, and then you're getting into over 9 feet when you're in the red. And then once you start to work in that Big Bend area and then down the Florida Peninsula on the east side of the low, you could see those storm surge values going over 12 feet. Now on the western side, where the eye wall is supposed to be coming in, of course you're going to have more of an offshore flow, so quickly those numbers drop off as you work your way westward to Mexico Beach and Panama City. So as long as the center of circulation kind of pulls in this particular area here, your biggest storm surge is going to be just to the east of that. But even though our cone, remember, at 72 hours is 102 miles wide, and at 60 hours it's 88 miles wide, even when you get down to the 12-hour period, that cone is still about 22 miles wide. So you think about that, as the crow flies, that's from here to Lafayette to New Iberia, Lafayette to Opelousas, Lafayette to beyond Crowley, and Lafayette to about where the Whiskey Bay Bridge is going off to the east. So that circle is a lot bigger. So again, it's going to be covering larger areas than what the actual cone shows, and you can see that right there. So here are the latest hurricane models, and yes, they do shift kind of west and east a little bit, but the consensus is still basically from about Panama City going eastward to the northern part of that Big Bend area. And I measured that earlier today. That is about 120 miles. So remember, the margin of error on the cone is about 88. So these models go out at about 122, 123 miles. So you can still have some effects, especially on the eastern side of this particular system. And the intensity models kind of were way up there in the Category 5 range in some cases late yesterday evening. Then they kind of fell back into the Category 2, Category 3 area. And this afternoon, some of these newer models that are coming out are stretching a few of these back into Cat 4. but the bulk of them are right here in that Cat 2, Cat 3, and then you got a handful of them down here that keep it down to a tropical storm. So the consensus is with the National Hurricane Center that this will make landfall as a Category 3 hurricane with winds at 115 miles per hour, which is right there in the middle of where the model consensus is. Water temperatures, of course, is going to be a big factor here. The western part of the Caribbean, southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, those are basically the warmest water temperatures that we currently have over parts of the Atlantic basin. And then you have the tropical cyclone heat potential, which doesn't just measure the warm waters at the very surface, but also how deep those go. And these numbers here over the western Caribbean and the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico have basically been off the charts here pretty much all hurricane season long. And that has been the concern of most of us meteorologists, that you get something to develop here, and if you get the right kind of atmospheric conditions, these things can blow up so quickly, and we've seen it several times before. And a couple of the models, the hurricane-specific models that I was looking at 24 hours ago, were showing some of these pressures going under 900 millibars, which would be a Category 5 hurricane, and we've only really seen about 5 or 6 hurricanes go below 900 millibars. Of course, the largest one is Hurricane Wilma, went down to 882 millibars, and then Hurricane Rita, which is one that we're all familiar with here in Louisiana, dropped down to 895 for a while before it made its way toward the Louisiana coast. And both of those hurricanes happened during the 2005 hurricane season. So models don't quite go that deep on the pressure today, but you're going to see some differences between reality and what the models say. It may be weaker, it may be stronger. We just don't know, and we give you the best information that we have at this time, which is why we do additional forecasts when you see these models change. And we know that they're going to be changing at least a little bit, but because of what the outside factors are right now that would guide this hurricane toward the Florida Panhandle, those appear to be very strong, and that's why all of the model data is kind of lining up over one area. Well, we've got the wind shear that's still affecting the western side, some southwestern wind shear that's coming there off of the Yucatan and up toward Florida. And then you can see the tremendous amounts of wind shear that are now occurring here along the northern Gulf Coast. So if something were to try to come in this direction, it would probably start to get sheared apart unless some of this lower wind shear can make its way back to the north. And the forecast is to have this wind shear here should start to relax a bit. And if that happens, then it's going to be moving over that area of high tropical cyclone heat potential at the same time. So you've got two things that are really going in its favor for the possibility of strengthening. So let's go through some of the models, not going out 10 days. We're just going all the way out through Thursday evening, because basically all four of the global models are indicating a landfall or very close to landfall by the time we get to Thursday evening. You can see the position of the GFS is going toward the Big Bend area. The Euro kind of interacts a little bit more with the Yucatan, so it ends up being a weaker system by the time it reaches the Florida coastline. But just like the GFS, the final destination is right there in that Big Bend area east of Mexico Beach and west of Steinhatchee, which is as you start to go down into the Florida Peninsula. Canadian model, a little bit stronger than the Euro, but again, the direction of movement maybe 15 miles off toward the west, hitting over to around Apalachicola. And then the Icon model is coming up as well, and it's a fairly strong system, but it is very, very close to that Big Bend area, and all four of these models finish on Thursday evening. So when you look at all four of those models, you've got a lot of agreement, and that's why the forecast is pretty confident that we're going to see a Florida hit based on the model data that we have at this time at 12:13 on Tuesday afternoon. So there's the last landfalling, the hurricane part of the model there of the GFS. And the GFS, at least at landfall, is still indicating 68.4 knots. So that is a Category 1 hurricane. So the GFS on the intensity backing off just a little bit. And the Euro really has never been too strong on the official hurricane models that come from the Euro. This is still calling for a tropical storm here moving into the Big Bend area. But remember, the Euro was kind of fiddling there maybe with land with the Yucatan Peninsula, maybe moving it a little bit farther to the west there. Now the HWRF is considerably stronger, and this is again going into Thursday late afternoon. So you're still going to have a landfall here probably sometime into Thursday evening there in the Big Bend area or possibly over in this area. But look at those winds, 126 knots. So you're getting up there into the Category 4 territory. And the same thing with the HAFS model, which is actually even stronger. That's dropping the pressures down to 921 just offshore. And you've got your wind speeds up there in the top corner at 134.1 knots. And if my math is correct, I believe that would make it a Category 5, getting up over 155, close to 160 on the wind speeds there. Of course, if you get something that's this strong, you are going to have a tremendous amount of storm surge stretching from Fort Myers all the way up to where the system makes landfall. And for fun, the Canadian model has got a strike there at Apalachicola, and the Icon model is kind of shifting it just a little bit farther to the east, maybe pushing the eastern edge of that Big Bend region. But again, all of these models here are falling within about a 100-mile range, and the margin of error that the National Hurricane Center uses at 60 hours, which is about how far out we are, is 88 miles. So it's just the range of the models are just slightly outside of what the hurricane cone would be. But remember, about a third of tropical cyclones will pass kind of on the outside of that envelope. So that's the margin of error. Upper level patterns. So let's talk more about what we're talking about when it comes to the steering. And I showed you that trough. In fact, let me go back to the United States satellite here. And what we're looking at is this trough that's now starting to dig here across the middle part of the country. You can see the direction of movement of that air pushing to the south. As this drops down, it looks like it's going to maybe cut off kind of a low pressure area here across the south, and as that trough kind of breaks apart, you get that low pressure area there that's just going to sit for a while. So when we're looking at those upper level models there, you can see that that's where that low goes. It's kind of cut off from the rest of the trough that ends up over here over the New England states. So there's that cutoff low right there, which would tend to steer our tropical system up and around that low and then weaken over the Tennessee Valley. But unfortunately, it could be lingering, which might include a flood threat over parts of the deep south. The Euro, very similar to the GFS. You see, there's not much difference there. And the same thing goes with the Canadian as well as the Icon model. So your four global models are almost identical. I would say the GFS has the low the farthest to the south, and it looks like the Icon and the Canadian model have the low the farthest to the northeast. But again, we're still only talking about maybe 100 miles or so. So not a big difference from an upper level low there. So again, that's why the models are in such agreement that we're going to see a strike somewhere east of us over toward the Florida Panhandle, or maybe as far east as the Florida Peninsula. Now the good news is for us here in Acadiana, if this scenario pans out, we are going to see that cold front continuing to move off to the east, and as the low kind of drifts its way around, we'll pull in some cooler and drier air. So it looks like we're going to finish off the week with highs in the 80s, and with lower humidity, we might be able to drop down into the 60s at night, which is actually normal for this time of the year. It has been quite warm over the past several days, with those temperatures running in the 90s and that heat index getting up to near 100 degrees. But there's a more progressive pattern that seems to be showing up in the extended models going out a couple of weeks, where we might be able to see some better pushes of cooler, drier air, and usually we start to get that in October anyway. So fall is just around the corner, so please hang in there. It's not going to be much longer. Remember, though, that hurricane season doesn't end until November the 30th, although here in Louisiana we can kind of start letting our guard down once we turn the calendar page to November, but October can still be a fairly busy month. September, we get a lot of development that's still in the Gulf of Mexico, but we're running out of time here in September. We're down to 6 days. But you look at October, and October you get a lot of tropical systems that do form over the western part of the Caribbean Sea and the southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. But even in the blue areas from 2020 going all the way back to 1944, Upwards of about 30 tropical systems have passed through the central and western portions of the Gulf of Mexico, and we've seen that happen before. Back in 2020, we had Hurricanes Delta and Zeta both strike the Louisiana coast during the month of October, and we've had some pretty big ones too in the past. Hurricane Lily was a monster. Fortunately, it weakened right before it made landfall. But that was on October 3rd, and we know here in Acadiana, way back, what was that, 2002, so 22 years ago, those of us that were here remember the damage that Hurricane Lily was managing to bring here to the region, and it was just a Category 1. So don't let your guard down. I don't think we have to worry too much about Helene. It's going to be a storm to watch, and it could be a record-setting storm too. So if you're interested and you are kind of a weather geek and you want to see what a really mature hurricane looks like, I have a feeling that Helene is actually going to do that over the next couple of days. It is unfortunate for our friends that live to the east, especially those that were hit by Debbie back in August. This is their second strike, and I know it's such a pain to get ready for a landfalling hurricane. So our friends that are over toward Tallahassee, Valdosta, Georgia, Gainesville, all the way down the Florida coast into Tampa and Naples and Fort Myers and Port Charlotte, and all those communities are all going to be affected because of the path of this hurricane, as well as the final landfall, and the storm surge could be incredible. But if you're interested in seeing how this whole situation evolves, and you really want to see how a tropical system can go from 0 to 80 in nothing flat, this is probably the one that you want to watch. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. If you do, please like this video and subscribe to my channel and turn on those notifications. And for any updates on Tropical Storm Helene, which will probably become Hurricane Helene by tomorrow, please follow my social media pages. I'll keep you updated on each and every one of those advisories that we get from the National Hurricane Center until we get landfall. And of course, if it kind of stalls there over parts of the south and starts to affect our weather, we'll have the latest on that in Let's Talk Tropics, as well as Acadiana Weather Today that runs every weekday morning at 7:30. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Have a great Tuesday, and I will see you on Wednesday morning. Have a good one.